effectively depositioning competitors or landing the value proposition and putting it in the context for the potential customer, or using analogies that make sense for that customer and describing the capabilities that we had in the technology, or effectively questioning and interrogating the customer to understand potential use cases. This is a deep level of meaning in the conversation that I wonder if Orai can now, or whether in the future you see this technology helping with, i.e. beyond the how I present, beyond the mechanics of speech, and really sort of evaluating the deep meaning and helping people get better at conveying ideas.
When I mentioned in the beginning, our customers guide our roadmap, I have definitely heard the exact thing from a lot of sales leaders inside organizations, where when they do currently do assessments, it's a lot on the what of how people are saying. On, are they conveying the right message? Are they depositioning their competitors in the right manner? So yes, these are some things that we are thinking of and trying to figure out how we can train AI to be able to detect that, because it is a very, very hard problem to solve. Teaching AI to understand the semantics of speech is a hard problem.
Yes, and when you think about it, the power in a sales context or in any sort of persuasive or communicative context, the what and the how are just inextricably linked for us as humans, deeply linked. And that would be an awesome direction, I think, for you to explore the future of your product.
Yeah. And currently, we have features and functionality to help get close to that. Meaning, let's say a sales rep will practice their pitch on Orai. They will get the feedback on the how and the mechanics immediately. And then they have the option to share their feedback and the recording with their manager or their coach or their peer. And then the peer can leverage Orai's web dashboard to give time-stamped feedback on the what, on whether that introduction makes sense, on whether that next step or the closing makes sense, and give feedback in the moment through Orai.
I guess I have to ask you, just in the security and privacy domain, which is obviously a concern with this kind of technology, do you store the recordings? What happens to the recordings of my practice sessions? And what is your policy around that?
When GDPR came in, they brought in very strict regulations, but that actually made sense for the consumer perspective. And that's what we try to comply with. For example, the data is owned by the end learner, meaning they can choose to delete their data anytime just by swiping on the recording and it's gone. So we follow those strict regulations. Everything is encrypted when it's going from the mobile to our cloud service. And we work with some of the top organizations in the world. So we have gone through intense info security, data privacy regulations, and interviews. So we are very confident in delivering that.
At the same time, there has to be intelligence, and there has to be, the algorithms can learn from experience. Does that happen too when I'm using Orai? Am I teaching the algorithms?
In some ways, yes, but not all the time. There are only certain times where Orai needs to learn from your patterns to be able to give better, more contextualized feedback to you as an individual.
Got it. And everything's, that kind of data is anonymized, I assume.
100%.
What are some of the, now I want to talk a little bit about your observations. You don't come from a learning and development background, but you are obviously working with a lot of organizations, L&D leaders, sales leaders, putting your technology to work to help their people get better. I'd love to talk a little bit about your observations and what you're seeing. So can you talk about how customers are using your app in interesting or innovative ways?
Sure. One thing that we have is this on-demand coaching. And we break down our personas into two. We have client-facing personas and then non-client-facing. So the client-facing, who include your sales engineers, who include your AEs, your customer support managers, all of them are day-to-day life is to talk to people.
Yeah.
And the way they talk to their people is dependent on their communication proficiency. Do they sound trustworthy? Do they sound confident? And that's what we help for. That's why I mentioned at the very beginning our 3 C's: confidence, compelling, and concise. We help these client-facing people become more confident and thereby sound more trustworthy to their customers. And some of the tangible business outcomes that's leading is higher sales conversions, higher deal sizes, giving less discounts to your customers, and making sure that there's velocity from initial prospecting and demo to actually closing, because the customer is building trust with you. So that's all with the client-facing groups where we offer training on. And this training can be standalone. It can also be part of some structured training where it can reinforce that. And when you look at non-client-facing, these people, like technical engineers, software architects, system engineers, or even tax accountants, they are still talking. They still have customers. These might be internal customers who they have to share product updates with. They have to do presentations. So there's still the same type of communication happening. And when you make them more concise, more compelling, what happens is, one, you increase their productivity. When your people are more productive, your company is saving money. Number two, you're making them more compelling and thereby making sure that ideas are actually heard. I loved at the beginning you mentioned initially engineers were thought of as just cogs in a big machine. But now, the more you can get these people to talk with each other, the more innovation there will be in the organization, the more ideas that will come forward. And that's all because you gave someone the confidence to speak up. You gave someone the compelling skills to present their ideas. That's all that matters.
I mean, in a way, you can think about it as a critical tool for engineers, because in order to make sure they're working on the right problem, in order to make sure their solutions kind of land with their peers, you need clear communication protocols and approaches. So it seems a lot of sense in the idea that better communication kind of lifts all boats. I'd like to get your point of view on what do you think are the biggest challenges facing people in the learning and development profession today? And in particular, do you see challenges that technology can help with?
I think the biggest challenge is time. Everyone is strapped for time. And as the world becomes more and more competitive, people are asked to do more and more things in the same amount of time that they have. So anything that vendors can do from their end to minimize the time commitment and responsibility of your buyer, that's what I've learned is something that's ideal. So that's one of the biggest challenge I've seen with learning and development experts.
You also mentioned to me that I think you wanted to see L&D people kind of be more open.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
I think when vendors or technology providers come to buyers, I fundamentally believe the more open a buyer can be, the more better way a vendor or technology provider can solve a problem. So the more you share with them the pain points, the challenges, the more these technologies providers can go back to their drawing boards and figure out solutions from outside the box. As a learning expert or a learning organization, you might be thinking from your vision, from your viewpoints. But if you share those ideas and thoughts with someone outside of your organization, they might look into your organization from a different perspective, from a different viewpoint, and they might find ways and techniques of solving the same problem more effectively, more efficiently, in a more time-solving manner. So I would really, really advocate for more dialogue happening between vendors and the buyers.
Yeah, this is a theme that we in the Learning Futures group have talked about before and other people on the podcast, there seems to be this sort of particularly exaggerated divide between technology providers and practitioners in the learning and development space. And there's sort of this chasm that there are all kinds of rules of engagement around. And we all have a really tough challenge ahead of us to help prepare people for a future of work where change is going to be the only constant. And I personally would like to see better mechanisms for practitioners and solution providers to kind of work together to move the profession forward. So I like that. I like that call to action there. Very good.
I like your statement. Change is going to be the only constant. Things are going to change, and we should be okay with that. And then the other thing I would suggest is embrace the concept of experimentation. Yes, you might not be able to buy $100,000 license for this new technology, but perhaps you can do a small proof of concept and be okay with that and remove all the hurdles so that from your initial conversation, it's not more than a month to actually do your proof of concept, to do your experimentation.
I think that's a lot about how technology itself has evolved, Danish. I think maybe 15 years ago, a technology decision was a massive decision with deep consequences and lots of investment and a multi-year implementation phase. And today I see companies like yours, very agile, because of access to things like Amazon Web Services and libraries of code. You can do really interesting things. You can provide really interesting solutions in quite a relatively agile way. And I'm not sure that the thinking of buyers is quite caught up with the reality of the technology marketplace today.
So you, as a practitioner, how did you become more aware of these things, and how would you advise others to become more aware of these changes?
Well, I think it comes down to curiosity and making the space and the time to apply that curiosity, to really look around and see what's going on in the world. To be honest with you, since I stepped away from my sort of executive role, I've had more time to look and just be curious. And I'd wished earlier in my career I'd made more time to do that, to invite people in who have fledgling technologies and to experiment more. Yeah, definitely a learning for me over the last kind of 6 months.
I love the word curious, and everyone should be curious. And that is one thing that actually reduces as we get older. When I look at babies, I see them touching everything. I'm like, there's nothing to touch there. It's just a draw, and that's it. Why are you touching that spring? But they're so curious, and we should be curious, and we should not let that die away. So I love that curious point that you mentioned.
100%. I think often it's curiosity as a mindset is so important. And when you see successful people and you see brilliant people and you see great leaders, many, many times they really lead with curiosity and this growth mindset. I also think it's very easy to put that aside in a busy world where you're snowed under with information and you've got a million things to do. And that is really unfortunate. And one of the things that I think there are good people trying to create techniques to ward off.
And that's why you said you have to make that time. So do you think this is the responsibility of the practitioner to make time to be curious, or is it the organization's responsibility to give you time to be curious?
Well, I personally, to get on my soapbox here, which maybe I'm allowed to do because it's my podcast, but at the Learning Futures Group, we would say this is absolutely essential if you want to be in the learning and development space. If your job is to help prepare people for the future of work, then first of all, be aware that that future is going to be very different and it's going to change at an increasingly rapid rate. Secondly, everything that you can do to prepare workers and future workers to thrive in that kind of environment is absolutely your responsibility. So it's mission critical as far as I'm concerned.
Good.
Can I ask you a question? that I will kind of maybe slot back in